Hello everyone, in this video I'd like to talk about the upcoming gubernatorial primary this June 7th in my state of California. Now primaries work a bit different in Cali. The top two candidates, regardless of party, go to the general election. Now, he doesn't deserve it, even though he doesn't deserve it as the most corrupt and incompetent governor to date. Newsom, as I call him, will most likely be one of those two. The question is, who's the best candidate to challenge him? Now, Larry Elder and Kevin Kiley, who were the best candidates in the recall election, won't be returning. But over 2,500 candidates will be running. Most of them are Republicans, but we have 5 independents and 3 Democrats other than Newsom running, along with a candidate from the Green Party. Now, no candidate from the Libertarian Party, though that's likely, due to the California LP probably not getting ballot access this time around. Now, I'll rant about that unconstitutional garbage some other time, though, but I researched all of them except for the Green Party candidate and the Democratic candidates because, well, the Green Party is a little too far to the left for me, and the Democrats have pretty much had their chance with a decades-long supermajority, though one of the independents candidates I looked at is, in fact, a former Democrat. Now, again, I would look at a Democratic candidate if it was somebody like Kevin Paffrath, but I don't think these candidates really have that much in common with him. But anyway, the first candidate I'm going to talk about is State Senator Brian Dahl. Now, Dahl has been endorsed by the state GOP and has most of the establishment support behind him. As the only elected office holder I looked at least that I can remember in the multitude of other candidates, he has a more clear track record, which makes examining him a bit easier than most of the other candidates, even though he's the last one I looked at. Now, I have a link to his voting record and all information in the description about all other candidates. Now, the description will contain a lot of links to information about all the candidates, of course. Again, I'd like to stress that, so in case you want to look yourself. But Brian Dahl is an extremely disappointing candidate, and frankly, I'm 50-50 on whether I'll vote for him in the likely event that he goes on to the general election. Now, I'm very concerned about the number of voting abstentions he has on his record. I found 42 in total, which makes me wonder if he would show similar negligence as governor. I frankly should hope not. But there are a few abstentions that really stand out. SB 918, which increased fee for eligibility checks for sale of firearm parts. While it doesn't ban any guns or parts, it's still a violation of the Second Amendment because it makes it more difficult for the poor and middle class to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Is when one of the dirtiest tricks the gun grabbers essentially use is to try to make it to where only the super rich can afford to buy firearms. And as SB 98 allows journalists to do their jobs in areas normally closed to the public by police. Now, it seems like an important issue that has safety and First Amendment ramifications that kind of deserves the attention of its elected leaders. So AB 1403, if passed, would have authorized planned power outages and emergencies, quote-unquote, which was a bill so terrible that even Newsom said no. Now, what does that tell you? And then there's AB 1196, which prohibits the use of police chokeholds like the one that contributed to the death of George Floyd, which is even worse than him voting no, because at least then he'd be on record as giving an up or down answer. There are more, but I think you honestly get the point. It really shows a complete and utter lack of any sort of principles or moral courage, which is disappointing to see. Of course, he voted no on the vast majority of bills due to the legislature having a decades-long Democrat supermajority, and as a Republican. Now, there are some yes votes which are a little disappointing, though. AB 3121 established a task force for reparations, even though nobody alive today has had any parents or grandparents that were in the transatlantic slave trade. The whole concept of reparations for that is frankly kind of stupid. And so he voted for SB 87, expands COVID small business assistance which shouldn't exist because government shouldn't pick winners and losers. I know the lockdowns caused the problem and it wasn't those businesses' fault, but still, I think a better answer to this is instead of making the money printer go burr, ending the lockdowns and holding these corrupt politicians like Newsom who pushed for these lockdowns accountable to begin with. So really, I would kind of have preferred him to really come out more strongly against these lockdowns like some of the other candidates I'll mention later. And this SB 91, which extended the eviction moratorium, which is unconstitutional and made an already bad problem even worse. SB 793, which banned flavored tobacco products because, God forbid, people that are going to smoke anyway smoke something that's flavored. Look, smoking's bad no matter what, but still, I just don't like the idea of interfering in people's personal decisions. But worst of all, though, voted for AB 414, which passed a statewide health insurance mandate for Californians, which is a rather nice gift to the insurance companies and was likely a response to the Supreme Court striking down the individual mandate portion of Obamacare. So apparently he has no objections to using government force to make you buy a product. Yeah, that sounds very authoritarian. So Brian Dahl is a big government candidate, don't rock the boat style establishment swamp monster, which is the exact opposite of what California needs right now. Now why did he get that endorsement? There's some evidence via conveniently timed payment to the state GOP of $40,500 by his wife's state assembly committee, which you can read about again in the description. Not only is he a lukewarm big government quote-unquote conservative with zero political courage, but he and his wife, who's a state assembly member, are both corrupt to their core. So he may possibly be better than Newsom, but he still kind of sucks, quite frankly. Now next up is Major Williams. On a positive note, he opposes vaccine mandates, supports school choice, pro-Second Amendment, promised to repeal Newsom-Leahy's emergency powers. On the other hand, he said that FEMA has too little power. Well, I think that FEMA should be abolished on 10th Amendment grounds. He believes the governor should have a line-item veto, which gives the governor too much power and undermines the separation of powers. And while I like the idea of getting rid of the state income tax, I don't like the idea of replacing it with a tourist tax and replaced by, well, nothing at all. Next up is Ron Jones, who wants to revoke Newsom-Leahy's executive order, suspend the gas tax, have tax breaks for seniors, anti-lockdown, anti-mandate, calls himself the law and order candidate. And yeah, we need law and order, but we also need a better answer to criminal justice reform than what Newsom-Leahy and the supermajority are offering. I think there's a middle ground between crackdown on everyone and let criminals do whatever they want, like the Democrats are doing. Now, next up is Anthony Trimino, whose name I've heard mentioned quite a lot by the populist wing of the GOP. He's one of the most unapologetically anti-lockdown and anti-mandate candidates running. Recognizes government authority to offer recommendations regarding health, but rejects the idea of compulsion and emphasizes encouraging healthier lifestyle decisions regarding healthcare policy. So, yes, ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, as they say, and that's the approach he seems to be taking. I think it's a rather wise one. Now, he's also one of the most religious candidates, emphasizing God-given rights and how faith without works is dead, which is fine as long as he doesn't end up being a theocrat. Now, Trimino is a fairly decent candidate from what I've seen, but not my number one choice. Of course, I'm going to save that candidate for last. Now, I was unable to find much information on Cristian Raul Morales, and I don't like the fact that he didn't provide much information on his campaign website. It's almost like he doesn't want to be elected governor. Now, Michael Shellenberger, who's a former Democrat turned independent I mentioned earlier, is a bit of a mixed bag. On the positive end, his criminal justice policies are excellent. He rejects the false binary of police state measures and simply letting criminals have their way with the citizens that's all too often presented in debates about criminal justice reform. He's pro-nuclear energy, which, properly implemented, will go a long way toward a more efficient, environmentally friendly, and consumer-friendly energy policy. Has some good ideas to solve California's drought problems, such as encouraging desalination plants. He's not as anti-mandate and lockdown as Trimino and Williams, but is far more so than Newsom-Leahy, in that he believes some precautions were necessary early on, but that Newsom-Leahy went too far, and supports school choice. On the other hand, he also supports raising the minimum wage, which is economic suicide, especially with the high inflation rates we're seeing now. Though his statement during the recall election was unpopular, Larry Elder was right when he said that the minimum wage should be zero. Apparently it is zero in some Scandinavian countries, though they also have very strong labor unions. He's pro-gun, which alone is enough. He's pro-gun control, which alone is enough for me to not vote for him, because especially with the increasing crime rates and increasing government tyranny, and supports mandatory treatment for drug abuse and mental illness, which, barring any threats to themselves or others, is a massive threat to civil liberties. Shellenberger, to his credit, has some good ideas, and I think he's running for the right reasons, but he's not my candidate. Sorry, I can't vote for a candidate who's not pro-2A. Next up is Frederic C. Schultz, who has a few good ideas, but is, well, to put it bluntly, nuttier than squirrel poop. He's anti-lockdown and anti-mandate, which are requirements for me to even consider voting for a candidate in favor of pardoning people for victimless crimes, is one of the few candidates on here that wants to end the drug war, which is great. Ban private prisons, no forced treatment, has a pro-First and pro-Fourth Amendment stance, which is great, considering the fact that he's a human rights lawyer. Now, for the loonier policy proposals, he wants the United States Senate to be abolished, which is enters the category of shit that'll never happen land. Have free college, quote-unquote, a 32-hour work week, which is going to ship more jobs overseas to China. Government-guaranteed jobs. How the hell is that going to work? And describes himself as unapologetic pro-abortion and promises to allow unrestricted abortion on demand up until birth, and to mail out abortificants to Californians, and also wants to make the state a abortion sanctuary state like Mussolini's doing. As a dishonorable mention, his campaign website is a mess. A seriously god-awful mess. Come on, man. Take some time to edit and clean it up. Show us that you give a damn. Woodrow Sanders III is another independent running, is somewhat reform-minded. He wants State Department heads to be chosen by the department employees themselves and for them to serve a maximum of 3 years, to be extended to 5 years for good performance. Believes that the governor should not have the authority to reverse parole decisions, which is something I didn't even know the governor had the power to do. I like some of these ideas, but I wish I had more information about him. Reinette Senum, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, is also reform-minded, has some good ideas such as periodic audits of state departments, abolishing the gas tax, tax incentive for regenerative farming practices, audits of elected officials, stronger whistleblower protections, criminal justice reform such as requiring officers to live in the communities they police, ranked choice voting, remove ballot access laws for third-party and independent candidates to make it easier for them to run, and most importantly, again, no mandates or lockdowns. She's easily the best of the independent candidates running. Lonnie Sortor, who's up next, opposes lockdowns and mandates. Strongly pro-2A by supporting constitutional carry. Opposes Common Core critical race theory, believes that education should focus on math, reading, and history. Wants increased competitive bidding for state government contracts, pro-nuclear power, increased funding for fire prevention, and wants Procter & Gamble to pay for the cost of wildfires because many of them were started because our power grid wasn't properly maintained, and wants to reduce taxes and spending. Anyway, next up is James Hanink. He's running as an independent, but he's associated with the Solidarity Party, which was partially modeled after a political party of the same name in Poland that resisted communism back then during the 1980s and was heavily tied to the Catholic Church. This party is extremely theocratic. It basically wants to make Catholicism the official state religion of the United States, which is more than enough reason to never consider supporting a candidate affiliated with this party. This makes him the second worst independent candidate behind Mr. Abortion, as I like to call him. Shawn Collins' main area of concern seems to be on crime and education. Seems pretty standard law and order candidate, not much to say there. He supports school choice, reducing limits on charter school funding, abolish critical race theory in schools, and wants greater control for local school boards and determining educational policy. Serge Fiankan is an environmental candidate. Doesn't seem to be one of those loonies who wants to tax cow farts to stop glaciers from melting, though, so he's on the more reasonable end of that. Encourages more tree planting, environmentally cost-effective buildings, capturing rainwater, which is great policy. I wish all the candidates encouraged capturing rainwater. And urban farming. Opposes vax mandates, supports limited mask mandates, so that's kind of, that's a little bit of a knock, but not as bad as it could be. But he supports vocational training in schools. The only candidate I could find a public statement that opposes surgeries for quote-unquote trans children. Now, it's a sad day in this country's history that is necessary for any candidate to even have to take a position on that. It just should be common sense to everyone. Leo Zacky is very pro-InfoWars, making him not your average run-of-the-mill candidate. For those of you who don't know, it's a show hosted by someone who's been banned from pretty much all mainstream tech sites after the so-called insurrection last year. I'm not saying his name for algorithmic reasons, but it shouldn't be too hard to find out who I'm talking about with a basic search. But he's very much against lockdowns and mandates, heavily criticizes the elite despite being heir to the Zacky farm's fortune, making him almost like Donald Trump of this race. His most interesting idea is to melt snow in the Sierra Nevadas and use that to solve the drought and have enough left over to sell to Nevada, which sounds a little too good to be true, I think, but, I think it should be at least considered, even if I think he's exaggerating a bit on how effective it's going to be. Now, Bradley Zink's another environmentalist candidate in case he heavily emphasizes solar power and wind farms for alternate energy. The problem is, wind farms is that they tend to kill a lot of birds, which is a threat to local bird species, so you might want to rethink that one. Now, Rae Le Roux is the anti-Brian Dahl Republican, due to her being his fiercest critic that I'm aware of within the party. Like most of the Republican candidates, she's tough on crime approach, but she also supports some rehabilitation and expansion in mental health and drug treatment programs. Her strongest policies are water. Emphasize water collection via pumps, which is good, but I like that along with encouraging the collection of rainwater, some of our independent candidates are advocating. So, it's still a good policy. It still needs some fine-tuning, though. Now, David Lozano is up next. He has vague proposals that really don't get into too many specifics. He claims he wrote the book on police reform, for example, and doesn't go into detail as to how he supposedly accomplished this or what reforms he would implement as governor. He also makes the equally vacuous claim that he would change the real estate market. Again, with no specifics on COVID policy, he would listen to the experts and let us get back to normal. Lozano is the most wishy-washy of all the candidates in this race. I have no idea what he would actually do, and frankly, it doesn't seem like he does either. At least not until he looks at some polling data. Next up is Ronald A. Anderson, who focuses most heavily on the homeless problem, border issues, and law enforcement issues. He makes an excellent point when he mentions how homeless are often not hired due to their haggard appearance and hygiene issues, which makes homeless people makeovers part of his solution to the homeless problem. I can see it helping in the cases where you have people that are homeless due to financial reasons, but you also have a lot of homeless people that struggle with substance abuse and mental health issues, and you actually have, believe it or not, a large homeless population that actually choose to be homeless. I'm actually completely serious. So, maybe we should do some studies on those people and why they choose that. Does it have anything to do with mental health or drug issues? I don't know. I really don't know why. But anyway, that's a subject for another video. He also says we should cut taxes and spending, which is true, but that contradicts himself saying we should tax Chinese products being shipped to California to make up for the financial damage from the lockdowns, which is unconstitutional because it violates the Interstate Commerce Clause and because protectionism is financially unsound, as we're now learning by shutting Russia out of the global economy, which is ironically harming us far more often than it is in Russia. Now, before you grab your torches and pitchforks, no, I get what Putin did was wrong, but I'm just saying that our policies are a little backwards on that. Next up is Robert C. Newman III, who states on his campaign website that he claims that God told him to run for governor, which is enough reason for me to never consider voting for him for governor or any other political office. I remember a certain president that also claimed God told him to run for office, and he ended up lying us into a war, which further destabilized the Middle East, so that he could line the pockets of his corrupt friends in the oil and defense industries, and tore the Constitution to shreds with the Patriot Act and other blatantly unconstitutional policies in the name of keeping us safe from terrorists, which are all still on the books, by the way, and ended up becoming precedent, of course, for the totalitarian COVID lockdowns of the last 2 years. Now, I believe in God and will admit some of my personal beliefs tended more conservative as I've gotten older, but I also believe that government should not be the arbiter of personal behavior for the most part, and that making claims of God choosing you as a candidate is arrogant, self-serving, and in complete contradiction of Scripture, I might add. I strongly suggest Newman III and others who would make such a claim or believe such a claim about a candidate read 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 10 through 22. Despite the massive shortcomings of him being the most blatantly theocratic candidate, I do give him credit, though, for being one of the few candidates in the race to bring up the problems with the Oroville Dam and how this threatens the safety of nearby residents and undermines our water supply. We should use some of the surplus money to fix the Oroville Dam as soon as possible. But last but not least is my actual chosen candidate. I'm proud to officially endorse, I don't do this very often on this channel, Daniel R. Mercuri for governor. Mercuri has the most detailed, well-organized policy proposals of all the candidates. He actually took the time to carefully write out his positions, and once you read them, you can actually tell that he wrote them himself and didn't just hire a staffer or two to write some worthless boilerplate, and doesn't mince words about what he would do if he was elected. Mercuri is actually even more based than Larry Elder, which says a lot. He talked about issues that only the likes of Ron Paul and Thomas Massey have the guts to even bring up. He wants to abolish the Federal Reserve, repeal the 16th Amendment, abolish the IRS, said he wants to starve the government, not the people, is strongly pro-gold, pro-crypto, and supports using nullification theory to defy federal gun laws. This guy is a constitutionalist. While he rejects the defund the police garbage, some of his reform proposals are quite good. He wants to increase police training by a minimum of 6 to 9 additional months, including on-the-job training, and to ban officers of disciplinary violations from being able to be transferred to another precinct. He has the best homeless policy proposals of any candidate, including the expansion of successful county homeless programs to neighboring counties, tax incentives to house the homeless, the removal of red tape from nonprofits to be able to help the homeless population. He is the most blatantly anti-mandate of all candidates, opposes not only COVID vaccine mandates, but all other vaccine and medical mandates as well, and openly calls for the repeal of the Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, in part because, in his opinion, it violates the Fifth Amendment and is a corporate welfare Ponzi scheme. I'm not sure that it violates the Fifth Amendment. I know it probably violates the 14th Amendment, and it is definitely a corporate Ponzi scheme. He is the most blatantly critical of big tech censorship, offering a digital Bill of Rights which emphasizes personal privacy and free speech. He is also the most fiscally conservative candidate by calling for the most dramatic reduction in state taxes by over 2/3 in some cases. He's also not afraid to voice concerns over election shenanigans. Let's just call it that for algorithmic purposes, and has called for the abolition of voting machines, mail-in ballots only to the elderly, disabled or active duty military, instead of literally everybody, along with investigations and severe punishments for local, county, and state officials that engage in shenanigans. The only negatives I could find about Mercuri is that he wants to increase federal defense spending and takes a rather hawkish stance on nations that are armed with nuclear weapons, but if elected governor, he wouldn't really deal with those particular issues. Now, on the positive end, his foreign policy views, he does want to reduce U.S. involvement in the Middle East. So if he were to run for federal office, such as House or Senate, I would more carefully consider his foreign policy views. And I know he would, of course, give some specifics and explain those points a bit more. Now, there are a lot of candidates that are some really horrible, and a few good ones. And then there's Daniel R. Mercuri, who I'm proud to give my vote for governor, even though the odds of him winning are unfortunately rather slim. Anyway, stay tuned for other updates when I talk about candidates in other California state races in the next video. I'm going to talk about the candidates in my districts for state assembly, state senate, and I'm going to talk about my district in Congress. Anyway, until then, see ya.